Amie Parnes is senior political correspondent for The Hill and author of several books, including Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, Shattered, Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign, and HRC, State Secrets and the Rebirth of Hillary Clinton. She's working on her fourth book now. Hey, Amie.
Hi, how are you?
Terrific. Thank you for joining me after what was a late night for all of us in this business.
Of course. Happy to be here.
How much coffee and Red Bull have you gone through today?
You know, I've had only one cup of coffee, and I'm craving a second.
I'm sure the coffee industry is going to see a huge spike from journalists today. It was an interesting night, and I got to tell you, Amie, this is not the conversation I expected to have with you this morning. I fully expected us to still be counting the vote in Pennsylvania. I mean, there are other states that are still counting for sure, and the final vote's not completely in yet. But we were able to project Donald Trump to become the 47th president before 2 a.m., which was quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and I think it's something that Democrats weren't expecting, and I don't think Republicans were expecting it. I mean, this was a solid, decisive win. Donald Trump won the popular vote. I don't think Democrats thought that he could do that. I don't think they thought he could expand his base. He was successful in doing that. And so it was surprising in a lot of ways. And I right there with you. I thought that we would still be, I remember 2020 very well. They were still counting ballots well into the weekend, or up until the weekend. So I think that a lot of people anticipated a similar outcome, and were kind of surprised that it happened so quickly.
We're talking to Amie Parnes, senior political correspondent for The Hill, and you can follow her on X at Amie Parnes. So does winning the popular vote and crushing the blue wall give Donald Trump a new mandate that maybe he didn't have in 2016?
I think he definitely goes in with a mandate. This was a pretty decisive win for him. I know Democrats probably don't want to admit that, but he, winning the popular vote, Democrats felt like this would be a very close race. It wasn't really a close race. He won pretty decisively and he was able to play the table and won in all of these states. And so I think that he's going to come in thinking that he represents what the American people elected him to do. And I think that's what's scary to a lot of Democrats, that he will that there won't be these guardrails as they talk about, and that he'll kind of have carte blanche and do whatever he feels he wants to do. And so that is something that a lot of people are eyeing right now, just how he will govern in a second term.
So playing Wednesday morning quarterback, it looks like the key to Trump's victory this year may have been converting more African-American voters to the Republican Party and more Hispanics, which was quite unexpected. What does that teach the Democrat Party now? Does that maybe destroy the aspect of dividing us based along racial or gender lines?
Yes, I think that was one massive takeaway for Democrats. The fact that they way outspent him in trying to lure Latino voters to their column by tens of millions of dollars, and it didn't matter in the end. They were able to more effectively speak to these voters, and they came out in droves to support him in Puerto Rican communities, in other communities, in Caribbean communities. And I think that is what they are sort of upset and concerned about. These are people who traditionally should be Democrats, and they need to do there's a moment of reckoning, I think, for the Democratic Party in what they need to do in terms of ground game. You heard a lot about that in recent days, that they were feeling really good about 2,500 people across all of these battleground states and 300 offices. They thought that they were winning in that way, and Trump was outsourcing that. It turns out that all of this might be outdated, and so they need to kind of rebuild the playbook on how they communicate successfully to these voters, and figure out what issues matter to them, because I feel like they dropped the ball in a major way. I think that a lot of these voters felt like they weren't adequately represented by the Biden administration, that they weren't feeling any empathy coming from Democrats. And so this is all stuff they need to look at, I think, going forward.
And perhaps we'll stop looking at people as African-American voters or Hispanic voters and consider everyone to be an American voter, and issues that matter are issues that matter. Amie, you literally wrote a book about the doomed campaign of Hillary Clinton. Did Kamala Harris not learn anything from your book? Did you send her a copy?
I know for a fact that people on her campaign have read my book, and it was eerily similar to the outcome in 2016 in many different ways, not only just because it was a female candidate, but even the way that she never came out to greet her supporters in the way that Hillary Clinton also did not do on election night in 2016. So there were a lot of parallels here. But I do think that this is something the party needed to learn 8 years ago, and they might have been a little confident coming out of their 2020 victory. But what people don't realize was in 2020, Donald Trump only won by 43,000, or Joe Biden only won by 43,000 votes. So a little bit more for Donald Trump, and he could have easily won a second term in 2020. So they underestimated him. I think they underestimated him in the past and continue to underestimate him. And I think that was a problem. They always said to reporters, that Kamala Harris has room, she hasn't hit her ceiling, that Donald Trump has hit his ceiling. They were really off there.
We're almost out of time here. We're talking to Amie Parnes, senior political correspondent for The Hill, and you can find her on X at Amie Parnes, AMIE. Do you think this changes the way the media and some journalists approach their coverage of Donald Trump?
Possibly, but I do think that, it will be interesting to see the ways in which he governs and how that is covered. I think that a lot of Democrats feel like they in particular are kind of saying we need to not scream as much about Donald Trump and kind of give people a reason to vote for us. You can't run an election, a successful election, just based upon your opponent. And that is a big lesson that they learned and will have to continue to learn, that they have to speak. Elections are about the future. It's kind of cliche, but they need to give voters a reason to support them, and they haven't done as much in the last cycle.
I don't think you have time to answer this question before you got to run, but I think this also changes the dynamics about how national campaigns are run, with less focus on knocking on doors and big media buys and getting on social media and podcasts and being authentic with voters and reaching them in unique ways that Donald Trump seemed to be able to do in viral moments this campaign.
It definitely does. And, the Democrats have been pretty successful in doing that in places like Georgia in 2020, in kind of establishing themselves way before an election. So that's something that they can look back on and kind of take note of how they ran that playbook. I think they need to kind of figure out ways in which to communicate with these voters. They can't just count on traditional ground game anymore. It's changed in a lot of ways. I think they took it for granted in 2020 because that was such an anomaly with COVID, and they were able to kind of still run that playbook, but they can't do that anymore. So I think they have to almost burn the house down in order to rebuild it.
Amie, thank you so much for your time. Try to get some rest tonight.
Thank you so much.
Amie Parnes, senior political correspondent for The Hill, here on the Scott Sand Show. You can find her on X at Amie Parnes, AMIE.